Hello everybody, it's a pleasure to share with you today an inquiry into how a city can become a centre of both innovative technology and environmental innovation, drawing on the case of Cambridge in the UK. Cambridge is a case of unexpected innovation. It's very well known for its university and for its scientists. Its role of scientists extends from Isaac Newton in the 17th century through to the inspiring Stephen Hawking. Over 90 Nobel Prizes have been awarded to its scientists, more than to any other university. Unexpectedly, Cambridge has also become a centre of business innovation and has been transformed over one generation. So today we'll cover the following points. We'll ask why Cambridge UK is a centre of technology innovation and see how this has come about. And we'll also move to the question of whether Cambridge could be a centre of environmental innovation. Finally, we'll look at some lessons from the Cambridge case for both technology innovation and environmental innovation. So this transformation from sleepy market town and intellectual retreat to a bustling centre of technology clusters took place without the intention or planning of the authorities. In fact, the authorities were in the 1950s and early 60s trying to keep Cambridge special, keep those green spaces, and avoid Cambridge turning into an industrial city. But nevertheless, these developments occurred spontaneously. And we now have over 1,000 technology firms and their support ecosystem organizations in the area. It's difficult to compare clusters directly because of definitional differences, but we can compare the influences that are brought to bear on them. That's in column 4 of this table. One influence that I haven't mentioned here is the metropolitan influence. In places like London, Berlin, Paris, there are technology clusters which are influenced by the very fact that they're in a metropolis. Then in Stockholm and Munich, we have corporate influences, the corporate spin-outs. Sophia Antipolis represents the influence of the government, the French government initiative to set up this technology cluster. And in Silicon Valley and in Route 128 in Massachusetts, the government input took the form of defense spending, which spurred technology innovation in those places. But in Cambridge, the predominant influence was the science base, and there's very little influence from those other factors. So Cambridge provides a kind of natural experiment to show that diffusion from the science base can, of its own initiative, create technology clusters. Economists put forward a variety of explanations of how clusters come about. The original one was the production chain idea, the industrial district made up of customers and suppliers and producers. But in advanced technology, these production chains or value chains are spread right across the globe. They're not just local. Another explanation that economists put forward is what they call positive externalities, that is, benefits of co-location for which the firms concerned don't have to pay. This is also called spillovers, and we'll see that there can also be negative externalities from co-location. A fashionable explanation is in terms of social capital, that is the store of trust and relations of trust that build up in a locality. Now, all these three factors do operate in Cambridge, but they weren't there initially. So we need an explanation that will explain how this came about. And I find that the ecologists, in their theory of ecological succession, provide a good fit with the evidence. They see both internal and external influences working together to create a complex, dynamic system of activity. So The university was the initial resource pool for the technology cluster in the area, and the university provides a continually renewed flow of knowledge, researchers and students. Students are particularly important. The World Bank book on universities and economic growth showed that even very good research centres, they don't do any teaching and don't have students, are unlikely to develop spin-out businesses that apply their knowledge to market applications. So the former students, and particularly postdocs, are the lifeblood of a technology cluster. In Cambridge, pioneering computing skills were very important and were very accessible in the 50s and 60s. Intellectual property is often believed to be important, but in the Cambridge case, this was vested by the university in the inventors. So the university didn't claim intellectual property in patents taken out by their scientists. Cambridge has a very high incidence of patenting, but that wasn't the key factor. The key factor were the agents of technology transfer, the postdoctoral researchers and scientists who created an entrepreneurial culture. The university didn't either encourage or discourage their scientists who turned entrepreneurs. So long as they were doing their teaching and their research, they allowed them to get on with other activities. The state was also laissez-faire. They didn't encourage the clusters, though there was an important input from central government in the form of support for science and state grants for students, which means that we pulled on a very wide and accessible to the students' pool of talent. So if they were admitted by competitive examination, all their costs were borne by grants. And the early process was one whereby spin-outs occurred from the laboratories, first of all in instrumentation and then in other areas. There's a wide variety of sectors. So Cambridge is sometimes called a cluster of clusters, and these clusters include not only instrumentation now, but IT, biotech, biomed, telecoms, wireless, advanced materials, and other sectors, including environmental applications. These all reflect the strengths in university science, but the businesses have moved beyond the university's orbit, and a culture of technology enterprise emerged and has diffused. We can sum up these developments in terms of this system dynamic chart. Starting on the left-hand corner, the ring of red, scientists recognized that they could use their skills and research knowledge and IT knowledge to create technologies for which there was international demand. So they spun out these companies from their laboratories, and over time, Cambridge became a good place to do technology business. A local capability was created. As these firms began to create value by the 1980s, they started to exert an attraction effect, a benevolent cycle, as it were, shown in the top left-hand corner, whereby businesses were attracted from elsewhere to Cambridge. And this value creation process continued throughout the 80s and 90s. Planning controls were relaxed, corporate incomers arrived, and embedded corporate R&D labs were set up within university departments. There was an attraction of business services and eventually of venture capital. This growth spiral continued, but there were also national benefits as the central government realized the benefits of investing in science for the economy. So that benefited other places, and many other places in the UK, Oxford and Imperial College in particular, are well known for their spin-outs. Here is a chart showing numbers of firms and jobs in the technology area. You'll see that after about 2004, the numbers of firms fell, but this was because of reduction in the number of micro firms in IT in particular. The number of jobs kept up, and the jobs in emerging sectors have continued to grow even despite the recession. We found that the multiplication and growth of local firms accounts for about 2/3 of the cluster's expansion, and 1/3 resulted from the attraction of firms to the area. Cambridge has excellent data archives, and we've recently embedded our data in an interactive map of Cambridge technology firms, which you can explore for yourself from this database. I think the slide will be available to you after the talk. So, as the ecologists say, both internal and external influences created local capabilities. And it's a good thing for a city to build up archives and longitudinal data on its companies, because then you can see what kind of local capabilities are built up. We've used measures of formation of tech-based firms to assess the ability to create new firms. And as you can see, we can look at survival, we can look at skills through sectoral distribution, we can look at ability to attract other knowledge-based companies to the area, and the ability to grow firms. Cambridge is strong on the first 4 of those capabilities. The ability to grow very big firms is in question. We'll come back to that issue. And there are papers analysing these trends available on our website. Turning from trends to people, economists don't usually include individuals in their analytics, but the role of individuals has cumulative impact, and like the critical incidents that ecologists talk about that have knock-on effects, initiatives by specific scientists, entrepreneurs, and local bankers over time changed the local outlook and ethos in Cambridge. Among these people, star professors have been important. People like Professor Andy Hopper, head of the Computer Science Lab. This chart shows at 5-year intervals some of the companies that Professor Hopper started with his students. So people leaving companies to find new ones fuel the growth of clusters, and the spin-outs may be more successful than their parent companies. Acorn Computers, for example, was a pioneer in microcomputing. In 1985, Acorn was struck by a cash flow crisis and was rescued by Olivetti, the Italian office equipment firm. The joke at the time of the takeover by Olivetti was that from little acorns grow great olive trees. Instead, employees leaving Acorn to set up their own company seeded a whole forest of saplings, several of which have grown into major corporations. The exits of just 4 of Acorn's spin-outs were worth £2 billion. One of the most important of these spin-outs was Advanced Risk Machines, ARM. ARM was founded by Acorn Computers as a joint venture with Apple Computers in California. And when Apple's fortunes were at a low ebb in the late 1990s, it sold its shares in Acorn ARM. It said that this made it possible to fund the iPod. If that's the case, then no Acorn, no iPod. And of course, it's likely that had there been no iPod, there would have been no iPhone. ARM now designs the chips for the iPhone. So Cambridge ideas have global reach in business as well as in science. And we can see here the business model of Advanced Risk Machines, which is a chip design and customer support model, a frugal business model. We saw that about 1/3 of the expansion in Cambridge was attributable to attraction. But in the biotech, biofarm, biomed area, attraction has been particularly important. The cluster of venture capital funds that we see in the area was also attracted by the biotech sector. Before these life sciences firms developed, there was very little biotechnology in the area. Inkjet printing firms also have global reach. Half or more of the Cambridge technology firms' revenues come from exports. And this case of Willits is interesting because it's a technology that originated in Cambridge, but the firm was moved to Corby to be eligible for regional development subsidies. So Cambridge has also spread out its technologies to other places in Britain. But these firms are not only global, they are also locally embedded. Let's look further at the inkjet printing firms. In the middle of the column of this chart, we have some of the Cambridge inkjet printers. And when Domino decided to discontinue its testing of its equipment, it gave its equipment to Hansetech in King's Lynn, 50 miles away. Hansetech then started to provide testing services for Domino's rivals, so creating positive externalities for the whole sector. And Domino benefited from being able to recruit experienced people from the whole pool of inkjet printing companies. Inkjet printing also illustrates sector evolution, because it's now realized that jet printing is not just a printing technology, it's a generic deposition technology. It can be used to lay down valuable substances on the substrate. And using this technology, new sectors have arisen in plastic electronics and intelligent materials. It looks as though a new innovation wave is emerging through new energy. And there are numerous science department projects generating new technologies with spin-outs. It's interesting that in all of these activities described in this slide, employment has actually been expanding during the recession years. Let's look at one of these firms, Unveil. They developed a technique for recovering 100% of aluminum from recycled laminate waste, using 95% less energy to produce secondary aluminium than producing primary aluminium. So this kind of waste mining is going to become increasingly important as minerals become scarce. Here's another one, Viridian Concepts, a spin-out of my department. This is not an advanced high-tech technology, rather they aimed to understand costs and to develop a cassette for solar thermal that would be easy to install and would lower construction costs. And they used a partnership model working with builders and new building firms. And finally, 819 is an example of technology that spun out from really leading edge research on light-emitting polymers. And the route to market that they've chosen is very interesting. Route to market is always a challenge for new materials ventures. And they chose new pay-as-you-go solar energy for emerging markets in Kenya and Sudan. And they've set up a spin-out, Indigo, to produce pay-as-you-go solar technologies for these African countries. And 819 is one of a number of Cambridge companies which is aiming to produce affordable products to raise living standards in emerging markets and also to tap into the growth in these markets. We saw that there's industrial district effects between producers and suppliers in Cambridge, and also that there are positive externalities. What about social capital? Well, we can see signs of social capital in active business networks. An important business network in Cambridge was the founding of the Cambridge Network in 1999. This is when people began to identify the city as a high-tech centre, which was still largely unnoticed, even 15 years after the first consultant's report on the Cambridge phenomenon. We were asked at this time by the New York Times to provide data for a Cambridge cluster map. The Cambridge Network has the slogan, "Cambridge Ideas Change the World." The latest business network is made up of firms offering environmental solutions. As a result of all this business activity, also tourism and education, Cambridge has the lowest unemployment rate in the UK. It's shown here with the light green line at the bottom of the curve. Unfortunate Hull at the top. You can see what a contrast there is between an innovative city and one which is trying to recover from in a more of a Rust Belt area. However, all this expansion has not been without its costs. There are also negative externalities associated with Cambridge growth, that is, disadvantages for which the firms concerned were not responsible. These rush hour hell, homes misery headlines are not new, but unfortunately the problems have not been fully remedied yet. And it's resulted in constraints on expansion. For example, the important Genome Research Centre could not be set up in the central part of the city and had to be located in a village right outside Cambridge. So this is bringing us to the major theme of this talk. Citywide innovations have not kept up with technology innovation in the city. Unfortunately, cycling is symptomatic. Cambridge has the highest incidence of cycling in the country, but poor provision for cyclists compared with Dutch and Nordic cities. How is it that we've got this contrast between leading in technology innovation and lagging in environmental innovations for the city? One issue is the age-long division between town and gown. Members of the university faculties are busy. With a few notable exceptions, they haven't had time to interest themselves in the governance of their city. And some city folk don't have all that much time for the university either. There's a joke about 3 Nobel Prize winners who were waiting for a train at Cambridge Station. As the door was closed, they all tried to get in. 2 of them succeeded. And the station attendant said to the one who was walking back, "You can catch another train in half an hour." The Nobel laureate replied, "But they came to say goodbye to me." However, the rift between town and gown is beginning to close. For example, there's a new university development in northwest Cambridge, and the aim is to work together with the city to meet the highest sustainability guidelines. Another example is of the Cambridge Retrofit project, which aims to improve the energy efficiency of old buildings. This is one of a large number of university city projects bringing together researchers, government and business. And here's a statement of the credentials of Cambridge to become an eco-city, the first such statement that I've come across. With its world-class intellectual resources, technology companies, political will, we hope, reputation and informed citizens, Cambridge is the ideal site for piloting an ambitious programme, in this case of retrofit, but could that be applied to other areas of innovation? We saw that the local authorities didn't support the expansion of technology innovation in the early years. In contrast, they have been very active and leading the initiatives for environmental improvements. Cambridgeshire has been targeted for housing expansion, and the challenge is to minimise the environmental impact of growth. Local authority have set targets for reductions in carbon dioxide emissions, for waste reduction, and for a higher percentage of energy to come from renewables. The city is now a pioneer in waste management nationally, and it's interesting that the EU stimulated initiatives of this kind via the Landfill Tax, so penalties can stimulate innovation. There have also been attempts to address congestion issues. A new station is to be built by the Science Park. There's a guided busway that's been developed, shown in red. It was controversial because of costs, but it's now heavily used. And elsewhere in the city, business leadership is emerging with a concern for the city's environment, in particular for Marshalls, a technology pioneer that owns large central sites. Among the most important developments in Cambridge are grassroots developments promoting a change in awareness and lifestyle. These groups don't want to prioritise GDP. They see prosperity coming from improved quality of life. They're committed to local food, local transport, to sharing skills, to reuse of products, repair cafes. They have a great deal to contribute to a vision for Cambridge and its implementation. An eco-city needs a vision for the future, and there are working parties developing a vision for Cambridge, with university, local authorities and business representatives taking part. Workshops are being held to collect information, to decide on priorities, and to try to translate this vision into a viable agenda for action. This is a challenge very different from that of creating technology clusters, but even more difficult. Let's go back to the issue of how to create an innovative technology cluster. It came about spontaneously in Cambridge, but a lot of literature and reports suggest that it's possible to create such a cluster if 6 key conditions are in place, as shown on this star. But are these conditions really necessary and sufficient? They're not necessary in that initially in Cambridge, neither intellectual property, IP, nor venture capital were important. And they're not sufficient because there are many places that have all 6, the universities, residential attractions, technology and IP being produced from the university, infrastructure, VC and science park, without having clusters of note. There are other important factors that were not shown on that slide. In particular, right at the center of the slide should be the technology entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial culture that they've created. Also, funding. Long-term investment is really critical, and the Cambridge firms have suffered from the short-term focus of the UK financial sector. Today, we're working in Cambridge to provide startup support for postdocs, to understand the kind of setbacks that derailed Acorn Computers, to help entrepreneurs avert such setbacks. Partnerships should be on that star. They are very important, and partnerships and knowledge consortia can be the key to success for these companies. Then technician training is very important, as is management training and understanding of processes and systems for integration and scale-up. If we look again at this star, we'll see that almost every one of these points could be applied to citywide innovation for the environmental sector, not just to technology innovation. So we have here some recommendations for citywide environmental innovation. This is more complicated, more difficult than creating and sustaining technology clusters, because so many parties and so many issues are involved. All of these, central government, businesses and networks, universities and schools, they are all involved, because after all the environment is the medium in which we all live and operate. And positive externalities operate no less for a citywide environment than for technology innovators. At times, political and funding issues seem insuperable. But could these challenges be surmounted in a city with Cambridge's credentials? What if business people, scientists and educationalists all recognized that they could operate better in an environmentally sound and sustainable city and came together to achieve this? If government provides basic support, as it did in investing in science and education in Cambridge, once a critical mass of local environmental activity is underway, this could develop its own impetus. But competition and incentives have fostered tech innovation. They are also needed for environmental innovation. Could competition between cities be stimulated in the environmental area? Ambitious initiatives are needed. We've had the Olympics in London this year, and that involves the same need to bring together high-level integration and management and planning with grassroots initiative and commitment. So could the World Bank stimulate working parties to encourage eco-Olympiads for cities at various levels, which would stimulate environmental improvements? We come now to lessons from Cambridge. Cambridge, of course, is unique, but so are all cities. Today, few, if any, are expecting Cambridge to become a pioneering eco-city, but could Cambridge confound expectations, as it did in the case of in the case of technology innovation? There are points in common between environmental innovation and tech innovation. It's important to understand and build on local strengths, to identify innovation champions and give them scope, to apply local skills to new areas of opportunity. And innovators need to control resources. In the case of both, long-term investment is required. It's taken decades for some technologies to come to fruition since the first research was done. And in the case of the environment, we don't have as long as that. Innovators need resources, and in the case of city environments, they need local budgets. Decentralization is in order. So in Cambridge, the environmental crisis has challenged long-standing divisions in the community. The challenge is now to stimulate innovation from the grassroots level while achieving integration of eco-resources. For this to happen in every city, the environmental challenge must empower citizens and unite diverse groups. Can these buzzwords, participation and empowerment, be translated into reality? If so, a sense of pride in the city's achievements can stimulate further efforts to make this a better place to live.